federal government today, threatening to exclude a CEO from doing business with the federal government because of a marketing snafu. Is this just another example of government going too far? For more on Forest Labs and its CEO, I'm joined by Richard Wessling, a lawyer with Waller, Lanston, Dortch and Davis. Richard, welcome to the show. Great to see you.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, so I found this case fascinating because I've never heard a thing like it. It's the first time I've heard of the government saying, hey, we're not going to do business with a specific person because we think he conducted himself badly. Has the government stepped over some line here?
Well, I think that the question we really have to ask ourselves is, has due process been upset by this? You know, what they're really doing is saying that you can be put out of an industry based on what your company does, whether you're involved in it directly or not. And that's definitely different.
That's new and different. Now, you know, the government says, this is their defense here, and it does make some sense to me, I have to say. They say, look, when we fine people at the end of the day, we dole out fines to people who misbehave, companies that misbehave. It really doesn't change the overall behavior. Is this the right step to take next, though? If the fining doesn't work, is the next step, okay, you're out of the program, we're not going to do business with you anymore?
I mean, it seems to me this step is a bit extreme. The government has a variety of enforcement tools in its arsenal that it can bring to bear. The fact that it may not be pleased with you know, the impact it has on an industry shouldn't be a reason to begin punishing people for things whether or not they have knowledge of actual misconduct.
And the misconduct we're talking about here, as I understand it, and you can correct me here, is that drugs that were developed by the company were marketed before federal approvals. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, basically, this is a marketing issue. That's a large area of enforcement these days, but it's not something that's unique to Forest Labs.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. Did the CEO know or understand that that was happening?
Well, I mean, I think we don't know that. What we know is that as a result of the larger settlement with Forest Labs, it doesn't appear that the Department of Justice presented evidence to suggest there was direct knowledge or involvement. And clearly, that's what makes this case unique, is the fact that you're bringing this to bear against a CEO, even though there isn't direct connection.
Do we know why this the marketing came before the OKs from the FDA? Do we have any idea why that happened? Was it competitive?
We don't. I mean, I'm not particularly familiar with the facts behind this settlement.
Well, I mean, I look at this, the whole story here is fascinating. It has many layers. The CEO of the company here, Mr. Solomon, his son had a depression problem. The company develops antidepressant medicines. This is what's at stake here. That's what we're talking about. So it's just, to me, there's an emotional element to this story as well.
Well, it's clearly a unique situation. I mean, this is a gentleman who has been with this company for decades, and he has apparently turned Forest Labs from a small entity into a very major player in the industry with an emphasis on these depression drugs. And so there definitely is more human drama here than we often see in cases like this.
And do you think that drug companies across the country are taking note here and changing what they're doing? Do you think there's a change in policy because of your company's case?
Well, I mean, obviously it's not my company, but I think that there clearly is going to be changes in policy. I mean, there's no question that if a company is threatened with exclusion of its officers, it can, you know, really interrupt that company's business plan. And while it has to deal with regulators day in and day out, this kind of targeting of individuals is new, and it's going to cause a substantial uproar, I think, among pharmaceuticals and other healthcare providers.
What would you say to critics, though, who say, look, you know, Howard Solomon deserves what he got. The buck stops at the CEO's chair. You know, you got to be responsible for what's going on. And if the law was broken, you have to take responsibility.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any question that there's some amount of responsibility that corporate America has to take. I think the question is, are we at a point now where we're beginning to say, despite the lack of what is normal due process, despite the lack of clear evidence connecting you to this kind of event, that we're going to basically take you out of an industry? I mean, that's a pretty extreme sanction for any one of us to lose our livelihood.
And I think that's
what we're talking about, and it's distressing.
What would happen to Forest Labs if they couldn't do business with the government?
Well, I mean, obviously they'd go out of business. I mean, there's no question about that. But I think what we're really looking at here is that the board would never let that happen. As a practical matter, what they'd be forced to do is to have the government determine who it should or shouldn't have in the CEO chair.
Right. Well, that's certainly the issue, and we really appreciate your coming on and telling us about it. Fascinating case, obviously going to impact the industry for decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
And when we come back, as calls for investigations into Apple and Google heat up, both companies seemingly silent on the issue of privacy. Where are they? The latest on the fight next. Stocks closing at their highest levels in nearly 3 years, thanks to stronger corporate earnings and a lift in consumer confidence. The S&P 500 closing at its highest level since June 2008.
Can touch the sound of silence, and in the naked light I saw 10,000 people.